So when we are trying to add or subtract fractions, the major thing we're going to do is attempt to get ourselves a common denominator. And I need you to remember that that's the only way that we can add fractions. So as we go through, let's see if I can make this actually show up. We are going to do a bunch of examples with fractions. So the first one, looking at 5 plus 2/3. I have 5 wholes plus a 2/3 piece of a whole. So first thing I know is that this has a denominator of 1. They are not common. And so to get a common denominator, we can do, looking at this denominator, which is a 3, we can multiply the numerator and the denominator of the other fraction by 3. So I end up with 15/3, which now has a common denominator to 2/3. And if we're adding thirds, I'm still going to talk about thirds, and then we'll add these two values to get 17/3. Looking at example number 2, since they both are fractions, one thing we can notice is that 8 is a multiple of 4, which means we can get a common denominator just by using this fraction and knowing, well, if I multiply 4 by 2, I'll get 8. But if I multiply the denominator, I'm going to need to multiply the numerator to make sure I don't change my fraction. And in this case, I get 1 times 2 is 2, 4 times 2 is 8. So 1/4 is the same as 2/8. And then in black, I'm just going to add back the other fraction. Now that I have a common denominator, I'm adding eighths. So I'm still going to keep my eighths. And then I just have to see how many pieces of eighths I have in total, and that's 5/8. Now we get into when we have uncommon denominators, but they're not multiples of each other. So you're going to look at this 3 and say, is it possible for me to multiply 3 by a number to get 5, I should say an integer value, or even just a whole number? And I can't. Nor can I multiply 5 by a number to get 3 that happens to be a whole number. So for this, we're going to actually do this a little bit differently. If I want to get a common denominator, I'm going to look at that the common denominator will just be the multiplication of these two values, which gives us 15. So for my first fraction here, which I'll do in green, to get 15 as my denominator, I would multiply this by 5, which happens to be the other denominator. And then if I do that to my denominator, I need to do that to my numerator, so I don't change my fraction. And I get 2 times 5 is 10, and I get 3 times 5 is 15. So that's my first fraction with a common denominator of 15. My second fraction, I'll do in pink. If I need my denominator to be 15, I would have multiplied by the other denominator here, which is 3, which means I need to also multiply the numerator by 3. So I get 12/15. We are adding 15ths, and I'm still talking about 15ths, and I have a total of 22 15ths. And when I'm adding, okay, in this case, I'm still doing an addition problem. Yes, there are negatives, and we're going to look at that in a second. So right now, they're not common, so same thing. We can get a common denominator. There is something called a lowest common denominator or least common denominator. In this case, the least common denominator would be 18, meaning I can multiply 6 by 3 and get 18, and I can multiply 9 by 2 to get 18. If you didn't know that right away, you can use the same method that we had up top of just multiplying by the other denominator. I'm going to use this math fact to help me change my values. So in purple, I'm going to do -5/6. I'm going to multiply this by 3, I'm going to multiply my numerator by 3, and I get negative 15 over 18. Okay, and then I'm going to add a fraction, which will still be negative. I'll do that one in orange, and that one I multiplied by 2. If I multiply the denominator by 2, then I need to multiply the numerator by 2. Okay, so I end up with 14 in the numerator, and I end up with 18 in the denominator. And I want to bring back my scoreboard method of addition. So if this is an addition, I can use a scoreboard. This is my positive team, and this is my negative team. And in this case, my negative team has 5/18 of a point. And then they also happen to have 4/18 of a point. And so I know my negative team is winning. And my negative team is winning by a total of 29/18 points. Okay? And then number 5 is one where I added in with some subtraction. So before I even try to do the subtraction, I can decide, do I want to get my common denominator now, or do I want to change this over to an addition problem? I'm going to choose to change it to an addition problem. So in light blue, the first thing I'm going to do is change my problem to addition. So I add the additive inverse. The inverse of 4/5 is negative 4/5. So in this case, I'm going to think to myself, well, I don't know right away if there's a number that I can multiply 7 by to get 5, and there's definitely not a number I can multiply 5 by to get 7. So the easiest is to just do 7 multiplied by 5, which will give me a denominator of 35. And then on the right side, I can do 5 multiplied by 7 to get 35. So I'm really multiplying by the denominators. So in red, my first fraction becomes 7 times 5 is my denominator, which means I need to change the numerator by multiplying by 5. This ensures that the fraction is still equal. I still have an equal ratio. So I get 30/35 plus, make sure I change that. And in this case, I'm still going to be dealing with a negative number. Okay. My other fraction in blue, I would multiply this by 7, and I would multiply this by 7. And I end up with 28/35. So my fractions have a common denominator. I'm going to use my scoreboard. Here's my positive team. Here's my negative team. My positive team has 30/35 of a point. I know that seems weird. My negative team in blue has 28/35 of a point. Which team is winning right now? It's my positive team that's winning. By how many are they winning? Then I would have to do 30/35, take away the 28/35. And so I end up with 2/35.